Joined right now by civil trial attorney David Ring, criminal defense attorney, former prosecutor Safa Robinson-Ferrer, and also Matt Murphy, criminal defense attorney, who's with me right now as well, former prosecutor as well. Great to have you all here. Matt, I'll start with you. Got to ask you about Kid Cudi. Did he help the prosecution as much as I think he helped the prosecution?
Well, he's a very compelling witness. And as we were talking about off camera, have you ever seen somebody walk into a courtroom with more poise and coolness?
No.
I mean, ever. Smoking a cigarette, leather jacket, the whole deal. But you know, each one of these witnesses, it's almost creating like an insurmountable mountain of evidence against Sean Diddy Combs.
We got a bunch of questions coming in about this, obviously. So, David, this is from D Princess. Excuse me. Do you think Capricorn Clark, Diddy's assistant that was with him the night of Kid Cudi's burglary and car fire, will she take the stand?
You know, she should. She's a very important witness. And in fact, you know, that was a key part of Kid Cudi's testimony, was that Capricorn Clark, who obviously was an employee of Combs, that she was basically forced to ride in the car with him to Kid Cudi's house, and then calls Kid Cudi and says, hey, Combs and some others are at your house. They're inside your house right now, and I'm really scared. So why is that super important, separate and apart from the fact he, throws a Molotov cocktail in the Porsche? Because basically that's a charge of almost kidnapping. And that's a really important part of the RICO charge. So I think it'd be important to call her, and I would suspect we see her.
Got a question for you, Safa. This is from Shop Girl. Jesse, do you think without video surveillance or Cudi seeing them blow up the car that it's just hearsay? What do you think? I'll throw it to you, Safa.
Not necessarily. What people often don't realize is that testimony is evidence. And if somebody is testifying, what they testify to, a jury can use that to determine guilt or innocence. Not only that, but we have the exhibits that were moved in under Mr. and Miss Cudi, which show and corroborate the arson taking place, the nature of the relationship he had with Miss Ventura, and the interestingly semi-tumultuous relationship he had with Mr. Combs, and ultimately what became of that. So it's not necessarily hearsay. His testimony is evidence. The judge is going to instruct the jury on that and indicate to them that if they do find him credible, they can certainly consider his testimony and ultimately either come back with a guilty verdict or a not guilty verdict.
We got a question from Melissa Budas. That's not a question. Oh, Jesse, you have to give us AI video of the Cudi testimony. I'll tell you what, we probably will. So we're doing this thing up on Law&Crime's YouTube. We're taking the transcripts and we're using AI to make visual recreations of what the testimony might have been like. I think it's important to get that visual aspect of it. Obviously, there's no cameras, there's no audio equipment. So there's one thing just to see the transcript and read it versus another thing hearing it. And we're trying to do it for the most important pieces or some of the more memorable pieces of testimony from this case. We did it for opening statements. We did it for Cassandra Ventura's testimony. I have a feeling we'll probably do it for Kid Cudi's testimony. Okay, going to you, Matt. Got a question from Mbasa Naebi. Hi, Jesse. Mbasa from South Africa. Hi, thanks so much for tuning in all the way over there. If Sean Combs is convicted, how many times can he appeal his conviction? Is there a limit?
Not really. The short answer is not really. There are, after the direct appeal goes through the local circuit court, it theoretically could go all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. And then there's an entire thing known as the habeas process, where outside evidence that was not admitted or was not discovered at the time of the original trial can then be used to challenge the conviction or various counts that he may be convicted of. So what does that mean? That means essentially that if you have the funding to do it, it's almost unlimited.
I have another follow-up question for you about that from the same viewer. But before I do, I mentioned that as soon as court comes back, we're going to give you real-time updates. We have a court update. So prosecutor Maureen Comey says, they want to put an exhibit showing Miss Ventura scantily clad. We think it plays into a stereotype that if she dresses like this, she must have consented to the freak-offs. That is an interesting observation or interesting argument or maybe allegation put forward by the prosecutor here. David, let me throw that to you. What do you make of that?
What's the relevance of introducing a photo of Cassie in some sort of like a scantily clad outfit? I mean, truly, that's victim blaming. There's no purpose for it. And I agree with the prosecution. They're just trying to undermine her credibility and portray her to be, someone who sleeps around with a lot of people and not to be believed. So I think I can't see any reason why that would be admitted.
So David, I'll just throw that back. That you heard from the cross-examination of Kid Cudi where they were trying to suggest, Kid Cudi, she played you, huh? She played Sean Combs. She had burner phones, right? They're putting a lot of the emphasis on her. And I wonder what the argument is. Is it just to suggest that she can't be believed? That, she comes out these years later, says that she's a victim of sex trafficking, filed a lawsuit against Sean Combs. Do you think there's any ground to that? Do you see where they might be going?
Well, look, the defense wants to do everything they possibly can to undermine the credibility of Cassie Ventura. And so any chance they get, they're going to try to attack her, undermine her credibility, portray her to be, manipulative, and that, she was in this with Sean Combs and she did this to other people. So that's their defense. They've got to. She was such a powerful witness. They've got to do everything they can to try to undermine her credibility.
Got another update from court. The judge says, I only have the album cover. The Combs defense attorney, Anna Esteveo. We can bring it up on the screen, and then she does, but for the public gallery, by the way, the jury's not present. We've withdrawn some of the exhibits. It's rather about her career opportunities and the like. Safa, let me throw you into the mix. What interesting response.
Most definitely. And I think what the defense is trying to do here is basically show that despite her relationship ending with Mr. Combs, her career went on. She still had other employment opportunities. She was a very well notable singer, and that she was known all across the country and the world. And that her ending of the relationship with Mr. Combs did not stop that from occurring, did not stop her career, which will negate his power and control over her and over her career, which would blast the prosecution's theory that she was essentially a victim, that he controlled her every move with respect to, her personal life and her professional life. And that's what the defense is trying to go at there.
By the way, one of the things that we do during this lunchtime show is we not only take your questions, we not only take what's happening in real time and break it down, but we also put up polls. We put up a poll right now. Do you believe Diddy blew up Kid Cudi's car? Matt, 91% say yes, 9% say no. What do you make of that stat?
Well, I think it probably reflects exactly what the jury is thinking too. I think that's very persuasive evidence. And remember, Jesse, this is one of the predicate acts for the RICO violation. So arson is one of the allegations. And remember, they only have to establish 2 of those over the course of a 10-year period of time. So it's a very broad net. 2 of those predicate acts, and if they can establish the enterprise element, that's all they need for the RICO.
Can I get really, really legally specific here?
Sure.
Is it they have to prove he committed them? Or for purposes of racketeering conspiracy, there was a conspiracy to attempt to commit those crimes?
It can be anybody essentially involved in the conspiracy doing that. It does not have to be Sean Combs himself, which is an important distinction to make.
Do you think they have the criminal agreement aspect of racketeering proven?
That's one of the most interesting parts about this for me. RICO violations, remember, this was designed essentially for mafia type things, where you have a criminal organization or enterprise for profit. And the enterprise here, of course, would be Bad Boy Records. And the defense ultimately is going to argue here, none of this advances the actual enterprise, which is Bad Boy Records. So they're going to argue that it fails to establish RICO because...
I want the common purpose, though, would be to serve Sean Combs, make him happy, fulfill whatever desires he wants, right?
Well, that's exactly what the defense is ultimately, I think, going to argue. And this
Right.
may be such a fine point that this is something that's hashed out in the courts of appeal.
Yep.
But advancing the interests of an individual is not advancing the interests of the actual criminal enterprise or the enterprise itself. It's a very fine legal note, but I think the defense is keying in exactly on that point.
You're a good attorney. Did anybody tell you that? You're a good attorney, making a good argument here. Okay, got an update from court. The judge says, what's the relevance of these exhibits? Again, talking about photographs of Cassandra Ventura, it appears. Well, so the judge asks, what's the relevance of these exhibits? The next witness did Miss Ventura's makeup. Well, what's the purpose of the pictures? It's a 402 issue first, relevance. Combs' attorney responds, Ms. Ventura testified about her career being impacted. And the prosecutor says, I'll stipulate. David, so it seems to me the defense is suggesting to the idea that Sean Combs controlled all aspects of her life, controlled her career, her appearance, very important power dynamics for sex trafficking. But it does become a question if this is relevant. What are you taking away from that?
Look, I think it's a minor point. I mean, they're arguing over the introduction of this photo, whether it comes in or doesn't come in. Is it, at the end of the day, is it really going to make a big difference? So I get it, but again, I think I don't see the relevance to it unless I hear more argument.
Got a question for you, Safa. This is from MM7. Is it likely the prosecution is starting with older victims and older evidence, Cassie, Kid Cudi, but as the trial continues, they will get into more recent crimes and victims tied into the RICO case? Good question.
It's very possible. I think one of the main reasons why Miss Ventura went first initially was because she was victim number one. Not only that, she's very heavily pregnant. She could go into labor at some point in time in the very near future, and they wanted to ensure that she would still be able to testify in the event that she ultimately went into labor and would be out on some sort of maternity leave for the remainder of the trial. So I think that's initially why they put her on. I think we've still got to hear from victim two and victim three. I expect that they are going to be alleged newer victims and that they will provide more up to date or more recent testimony about more recent acts and activities alleged against Mr. Combs.
Safa, you mentioned alleged victim number three, so let me throw this question to you. This is from Vero463. Wasn't victim three subpoenaed? Wouldn't they be prosecuted for not appearing in court? Because there's an issue about where is this person? Are they having trouble contacting this person? Good question.
They can absolutely be prosecuted. So it's going to be interesting to see what route the government takes with respect to this victim. That is a material witness. That person has been subpoenaed. I think I've heard not only have they not been able to get a hold of victim three, but they also haven't been able to get a hold of the attorney. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's at least what I've heard. So very interesting to see how the government's going to handle this. Now, this person seems to not be cooperative at this point. Does the government really want to put a witness on who has been missing in action and uncooperative will also be a question that they're going to really have to strategically decide.
I got a question for you, Matt. This is from NLin93. If there were DNA from the car, so I think they're talking about Kid Cudi's Porsche that was allegedly set on fire by Sean Combs and his associates. If there were DNA from the car, wouldn't the feds know? Because he was asked about, do you know if DNA was extracted from the car? And he didn't know. This was the question that he was posed by Brian Steele. The DNA taken, are you aware it came back being a female? And there was an objection. Okay. And then Steele says, do you know there were DNA results? And Scott Miscuddy said no. So I guess go back to the question, if there were DNA from the car, wouldn't the feds know?
You would certainly think so. But you know, as a general proposition for everyone to understand, heat is one of the things that destroys DNA. Okay, heat, time, water. DNA is biological material, of course, and you wouldn't expect to find too much at an arson scene when it comes to DNA in general.
I mentioned I have another question from you from Mbasa Naebi. He mentioned this before. So you talked about how many times he can appeal if he's convicted. Follow-up question, can one appeal if they take a deal?
Generally, no. Once you take a deal, it essentially is, the appellate process is essentially ended at that. You've admitted what you've done, but I don't see any prospect here of any sort of settlement in this. This is going to go to a jury.
There was talk about whether or not he rejected a deal before trial, but now we're in the crux of the trial. We're after Cassandra Ventura's testimony. So the prosecution could be like, you forced us to put her on the stand and recount these traumatic memories, alleged traumatic memories. They might not offer a deal, or if it is a deal, it's not going to be as attractive as it was before, right?
Look, once the trial starts, once you get a jury panel, you start calling witnesses, it is very rare that this is not a civil case. And by the way, Dave Ring knows more about the civil side of sexual abuse than anybody else in the country. Civil cases often will settle in the middle because it's about money. Criminal cases are very different. This missile has been launched, so to speak, as one of my old bosses used to put it, and this is gonna get hashed out by the jury.
Speaking of David Ring, let me go to David Ring. We got a question from Claudio Zadorotos. I'm so sorry if I mispronounced your name. Could Sean Combs' defense be shielding officials present at the freak-off parties by not requesting the videos, choosing to play for a lighter sentence instead?
Well, I think if I understand the question right, are they saying it's Sean Combs' defense trying to, hide evidence in this trial? Is that the question? I mean, look,
Yeah, it's tough to know. Shielding officials present at the freak-off party, so I'm guessing they're assuming there are other people who are being not mentioned at these, freak-offs, and was deliberately not, moving forward with more evidence to show who was there. But how that ties into maybe a lighter sentence, I'm not sure I 100% follow, but yeah.
yeah. Look, I think that's the prosecution's job, right? The prosecution is the one they're going to go out there and they're going to find the witnesses who are there and who are willing to testify about this. So Sean Combs doesn't have any obligation to produce witnesses that hurt his defense. That's the prosecution's job. I think the prosecution so far has done a fine job of finding some of these key witnesses and former employees who are testifying and really laying out a RICO case against Combs and the enterprise.
So we have another update from court. It says, so again, it's back and forth about what image or images will be shown to the jury. The judge says, this one is of a public event, so what's the problem? Prosecutor Comey says, it's a low-cut dress. Judge says, I'm allowing it in, but not 652 nor 745. Bring in the witness and the jury. And the witness is a Mila Morales, who's a celebrity makeup artist. What's 652 or 745?
As far as the evidence code?
Yeah, if you know off the top of your head.
Essentially what the judge is doing is the judge is weighing prejudicial effect versus probative value on all these items of evidence. And the judge has to do that for virtually any item of evidence. So he is allowing in photos from the public event, but this judge has done a very good job, in my opinion, of kind of cutting away the fat, so to speak, on some of the more shocking or other things. For example, the jury saw stills of some of the freak-offs, but not the full video. It's going to be interesting to see what the defense does with that overall, but that's a judge's job. You're watching a judge essentially be a judge.
So before you guys got on, I was doing, I was giving my own analysis of the case, and one of the questions that I was asked was, if he's acquitted, do you think they're going to bring more charges against him? I said, probably highly unlikely. Whatever evidence they had against him, they were going to go forward with right now. Which does beg the question, because I brought it up before. I'll go to you, Safa. This is a question from Anthony O'Farrell. Why aren't there any minor victims in the criminal case? Because you and I know that he has been alleged to have abused minors in civil lawsuits. Criminal arena, very different than civil. But again, why, Safa, aren't there any minor victims in the criminal case?
I don't think that there's any evidence to support that there are any minor victims in this case. And if there certainly was evidence to support that, the government would have charged him with that. The burden of proof in the standard in our criminal world or during criminal practice is much different than civil. Civil is a much lower burden. With respect to criminal charges, there has to be an establishment of probable cause to make the arrest, and then the case will litigate on. And at the jury stage, once the jury gets the case, the government has to prove him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt for each element of each offense. I don't think that there is any evidence that would indicate that there were children victims or child victims, and because of that, the government wouldn't charge that.
Got an update from court. This is okay. So this is this makeup artist being questioned. The prosecutor says, do you recognize anyone you've worked for? And Ms. Morales says, Sean Combs in the gray sweater and white collar. When did you work for Mr. Combs? 2000 to 2005. Then who? Rihanna. Who else? Jennifer Lopez. Cassie. David, what are you expecting from this witness?
I'll be honest with you. I'm not sure. We're going to find out. I mean, did she witness more violent acts? Was she involved in some of these RICO predicate acts that she was drawn into? Did she see the bruises on Cassie's face? Did Cassie confide in her that she was being, beaten by Sean Combs? We don't know. We're going to find out really quickly.
And maybe covering up the bruises with makeup. That could potentially be what's going on. Got a question for you, Matt. Chris Buono. Can Combs at any time during the trial be charged with even more, or did all the charges need to be revealed in the indictment before the trial started? So kind of similar question.
Yeah, that's actually a great question. The answer is no. Okay, the defense is entitled to notice. So if new evidence comes to light, they would have to, in theory, charge that in a separate case. But like you said, Jesse, that's very, very rare, if not impossible, when it comes to criminal prosecutions, because he has a right to a defense, he has a right to prepare, he has a right to investigate and all that sort of thing. So the answer is no.
Safa, a question from Lily Gazarian. If the case becomes a hung jury and needs to be retried. Will he be released until the new trial begins?
I highly doubt that. They've made so many applications for his release, and the circumstances really won't change. They have to prove a risk of flight and a threat to the community, and they seem to have proven that here. And the judge seems to have gone along with the prosecution in the belief that there at least he may not be a risk of flight. However, there may be an issue with regard to being a threat to the community or witness tampering and things of that nature. So I do expect that if for some reason this lands in a mistrial, that he will remain in custody pending the new trial.
Okay, I got a new poll update and I got a court update. The poll update is, we put it out, does it matter if Diddy blew up Kid Cudi's car? 81% say yes, 19% say no. I side with the yes. I mentioned it before. Goes to arson, one of the predicate crimes for racketeering. Also goes to this overall concept of a criminal enterprise and violence and people helping Combs commit crimes or conceal crimes. That's the allegation put forward by the prosecution. Update from court. Prosecutor asks this makeup artist, when did you work with Cassie? Morales responds, 2007 until COVID. So 13 years. She was like a little sister to me. How much older than her are you? A few years. Did you see her with injuries on her face? 2010 Grammy weekend Prince party. There you go, David.
Corroborative evidence. The prosecution's doing a really good job of bringing in other witnesses who corroborate Cassie's testimony. And why is that important? It builds up Cassie's credibility in front of this jury, that she's just not up there saying things that aren't true. Now you have these independent witnesses coming in, backing up exactly what she testified to. Very important.
But David, I will say, I think I could feel very confident to say at this point the prosecution believes that Sean Combs physically abused Cassandra Ventura Fine. The documents, okay, the photographs, the 2016 video, her testimony, Dawn Richard's testimony, Kerry Morgan's testimony, makeup artist, her mother. I think there's a lot to suggest. The question becomes, is it sex trafficking? What do you think at this point in the case?
Absolutely, I think it is. Look, he is bringing in, basically male sex workers and paying them in cash to participate in these freak-offs. And you can have a debate all day on whether Cassie Ventura, it was consensual or not. I'll always take the position that it was not consensual. She is a victim. She's being beaten and she's being manipulated. And to me, that is absolutely sex trafficking.
Yeah, the counter argument is, of course, the defense would say it's just domestic violence. They're not attaching the physical violence to the freak-offs per se. But I will say this much. I think the two most concrete examples, why am I talking to myself? For two most concrete examples, I think, of sex trafficking, the 2016 tape, right? So he allegedly kicks her, beats her, drags her right after a freak-off or an alleged freak-off, and the allegation that on a plane, he shows her tapes of the freak-offs as a way to intimidate her, embarrass her, and what does he allegedly demand right after they land? A freak-off, she has a freak-off. That feels to me two concrete examples of sex trafficking.
Well, that's what the prosecution's theory is, certainly. But remember, there's essentially three incarnations of that. One is it's one of the predicate acts of the RICO allegations, okay? The other is the sex trafficking itself, but as the defense has pointed out, they must establish essentially fraud, coercion, or some form of threat of fear of force. So force, fraud, or coercion. The theory is coercion. She's being coerced to do that for financial reasons and everything else. The third incarnation, if you will, of that is the transportation of prostitutes over state lines. Sure. Those are Mann Act violations. Those carry up to a 10-year penalty each. I think the prosecution's already satisfied that.
I do too.
What the defense is going to argue is that this is exactly what you said. This is a domestic violence case. And it's the world's most persuasive domestic violence case with the video and everything else. But that is a problem in their relationship, and it doesn't go to advancing this criminal enterprise that they've alleged.
That's why they're focusing so much. He's jealous, he's anger, she was jealous, problems in the relationship.